we're continuing our focus on the state of security during the elections. Now, despite recent reports of successful counter-terrorism operations, there is widespread concern over the inadequacies of the Nigerian military following last week's audacious attack by Boko Haram on the city of Dharmasya. Now, will security threats hamper voter turnout, and how ready is the military in the event of an attack today? Well, Dr. Austin Tam-George, Executive Director for the Institute of Communications and Corporate Studies, Lagos, joins us back in the studios. We also have online Chris Moghalu, ex-U.S. military intelligence specialist, and from our Johannesburg studio is Laurence Caromba, International Studies Lecturer at the School of Social Science, Monash. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Austin, for taking the time out to join us. Let me start with you, since you're in the studio. Now, I mean, security has been a running theme, has been a major issue that we've been talking about. Yeah. We saw that audacious attack last week by Boko Haram on the town of Dharmasya. But then some people might argue that the 6 weeks, the postponement of the election, the army has achieved so much. Boko Haram has been dislodged from many, even its major stronghold just a few days ago, Goza. Are we ready today in the event of an attack?
Yes, I think so. I think so. Coming from the Victoria Garden City area in Lagos up to the studio, I saw a very visible presence of military personnel, as well as supported by the police, and they were very cautious, very, very professional. And my sense is that the military is very much up to the task. There could be sporadic incidents here and there. We've seen Twitter feeds reporting explosion. We don't know the cause yet in Enugu. We might have sporadic incidents of those kind of things, but my general sense going forward is that the military presence in the process, not to supervise the elections, but at least to provide an atmosphere of security has been good so far. What we need to see is to make sure that in areas that are predictably volatile, such as places in Yola, the rest of the Northeast, we need to have a prominent presence of the military personnel. And then in states that also have traditionally proven to be volatile, such as Rivers State, flashpoints such as Lagos, Rivers State, we need to make sure that we follow up to make sure that the security presence there satisfies the desire of the people in this process.
Chris, let me bring you in here. Are you confident of the ability of the military or security personnel to keep the peace today?
Absolutely. I think the military is capable of doing its job. They've been getting ready for a while now. They've been training. The ability of the Nigerian military has. We've seen that they can actually do this job. So I don't have a problem with what they're doing. I see that they're on the roads. I see that they're prepared. I see that they're trained very well for this. And we're just going to have to watch out and see how it unfolds.
Chris, do you think the military has been compromised a little bit here in terms of how it has conducted this campaign against Boko Haram? I mean, for more than 5 years, Boko Haram has been causing havoc in the Northeast. And then in the space of 6 weeks, we're seeing these huge military advances. And it makes you think, is the military playing politics here?
Well, I can't hear you very well, but from what I gathered, you said you're asking whether bringing the military in was politics? I didn't understand it.
No. The issue I'm raising is how quickly we have had the military rolling back Boko Haram in the Northeast in the past 6 weeks versus the progress that it has achieved in the past 5 years. And I am asking if the progress that's being reported is not tied into the to the election.
I'm very sorry. I could hardly hear you, but let me answer the some of the parts that I heard. A lot of people have been saying that it's been that the past 6 weeks. Why did it take 6 weeks for them to do this?
Yeah.
Well, what people don't understand with security is it takes a long time to get certain things done. The intelligence has to be correct. The logistics have to be correct. The strategy has to be correct. Remember, they're dealing with multinational forces. The president, they have to work with the presidents of Cameroon, the president of Chad. There are a lot of things that go into all preparation for this. And then they have to get a UN approval. So it's not like they waited till now. I think they've been doing some work in the background leading up to this point.
We appear to be having some challenges with that line. Perhaps we can reconnect with Chris when we get a clearer line. Let me bring you in, Laurence. Now, one thing that has emerged, talking about Nigeria's security operations, the fact that Nigeria's military were not well equipped. At least we've heard the military complain about that. But in that 6 weeks when we had the postponement, we understand that Nigeria took purchased a large amount of arms and ammunition, equipped the Nigerian army, and that was when we began to see all the successes recorded by the Nigerian military. Just share your perspective in terms of why you think it took the Nigerian government that long to provide the military with much needed arms and ammunition to fight Boko Haram.
Yes, I think we've definitely seen an increased willingness, an increased political willingness in the run-up to this election to tackle Boko Haram. And I think it's tied into the sense of, that the Boko Haram insurgency has developed into a crisis situation. And you're absolutely correct that we've seen the Nigerian government go on this big sort of spending spree, buying military equipment from all over the place, buying armored personnel carriers from South Africa, helicopters from Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, they've sort of gone on a shopping spree, and this infusion of new equipment combined with this increased political will, along with support from Nigeria's international allies, has allowed the Nigerian government to make these pretty spectacular military advances over the past 6 weeks. That said, I think there is a legitimate question about whether these gains are going to be able to be consolidated and maintained after this sort of temporary crisis is over.
Do you see potentially these gains that have been reported making a difference in terms of voters' perceptions about who's best placed to tackle the insurgency? Does it matter then that we have General Muhammad Buhari coming in, or does it matter that we've got Goodluck Jonathan running the show?
My understanding is that there's a lot of perception. There's been a perception almost from people in the north of the country that because Goodluck Jonathan is a southerner and a Christian, that he's kind of allowed the insurgency to fester because it's not really his home territory. I don't know if that's necessarily a fair criticism per se, but there definitely has been a neglect by the Nigerian government in allowing this to fester for so long. So the gains that have been made now are really impressive, and I think it's been a huge morale boost for the Nigerian military. But like I say, whether these gains are going to be able to be maintained and consolidated in the long run still remains to be seen. What the military offensive has done is it's purchased some breathing room, some space for the government to find a more permanent political solution. And hopefully whichever government comes into power will be able to do that.
Now, Chris, we have Chris back on the line with us. Chris, if you can hear me, just your response to this. Now, in the last six weeks in the postponement of the election, we saw the Nigerian army taking a purchase of a large amount of arms and ammunition, and we've seen, like our guest in Johannesburg just said, the army making spectacular advances. Do you think this is going to inspire more confidence, and do you think this changes the perception of the international community as regards the ability of the ruling government to keep the peace and perhaps sustain the gains that we've seen now beyond where we are?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the confidence is there. I don't think the international community has ever doubted the fact that we can do this. But the issue had always been, can you do it alone, or could you do it with a multinational force? Now, it's better to do it together with a multinational force, and you've seen the results of working with our neighbors. Now, it is very critical that in the past we fought Boko Haram, we tried to fight Boko Haram alone, and we saw the results. But as soon as we started working with Chad, Cameroon, and some other neighbors like Niger, and the commitment of more troops, anytime you have insurgency, it's always good to build a troop surge. Once you have a troop surge, you can counter them and push them back. Now, once you push them back, you have to do it permanently. But doing it permanently costs a lot of money. So that's another thing the multinational forces need to be looking into in terms of dealing with terrorism. Also, the borders are very porous. So these guys are smuggling weapons from Libya and some of these other areas. So that's another area we need to look at.
All right, hold your thoughts for us. Let me come to you, Dr. Austin. Now, it got to a point where it became apparent that Nigeria couldn't fight this war alone. And of course, we know that the African Union met and there was talk about sending the troops, about 75,000 troops down to form a coalition to fight this battle. But we also heard reports that Nigeria wasn't too comfortable with sharing the battle with neighbors, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad, even though when we saw them all come together, that's when we began to see those spectacular advances. So was that, did it drop the issue of sovereignty on the part of Nigeria, or was it an image thing for Nigeria? Nigeria, of course, remembering the days of ECOMOG, keeping the peace in the region, did that threaten that image that we previously had?
Yeah, but ultimately, I think Chris was right when he said, you know, that this isn't something at all that, you know, needs to be bogged down by considerations of sovereignty. I mean, if you were fighting the insurgents and eventually they crossed over to another country and got protection, your effort would have been a waste. So the best thing to do all along was always to form this alliance, you know, between Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and all these other neighboring communities, Cameroon, to make sure that if the momentum originated from Nigeria, at least, you know, there would be other forces, you know, to make sure that these people didn't cross over. We didn't have that over so many years, and I suspect it didn't happen partly because there was no political determination to make it happen, also because there was this sense that the military, the political authorities in Nigeria were a bit disengaged from the fight. But as soon as they got the determination right and they got the right set of military assets, they formed this kind of coalition between Nigeria and a range of all of these other countries. What we've seen so far in the past 6 weeks has been very spectacular. We've seen a situation where not only did Nigeria initiate a lot of these attacks, we also saw that because of the collaboration that Nigeria was able to forge with Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, in fact, you know, soldiers from these countries were able to infiltrate into Nigerian territory and launch attacks. And the result has been the kind of spectacular you know, advances that we've seen. What I think, though, going forward is that we need to sustain the pressure. We need to make sure that training on counter-insurgency methods continue, because I suspect that the more the territories are lost by Boko Haram, the more they might want to resort to urban warfare. Okay. And what that means is that you won't be able to identify them. There'll be the tendency to always target soft spots like markets, supermarkets, you know, parking spaces and things like that. So what they need to do is to make sure they intensify counter-insurgency methods to identify the insurgents.
Thank you so much, Dr. Austin, for sharing that with us. That was Dr. Austin Tam-George, Executive Director at the Institute of Communications and Corporate Studies. Also joining us via telephone for that conversation was Chris Moghalu, ex-US military intelligence specialist. And of course, from our Johannesburg studio was Laurence Caromba, International Studies lecturer at the School of Social Science, Monash, discussing security concerns around today's elections. We've got more for you on our special coverage of Nigeria's 2015 elections. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're continuing our focus on security concerns. We'll discuss the effectiveness of the Nigerian military offensive and the likely security scenarios post-elections. We still have in the studio, with me, Dr. Austin Tam-George, Executive Director, Institute of Communications and Corporate Studies, Lagos. Also, still joining us via telephone is Chris Moghalu, ex-US intelligence specialist, and of course from our Johannesburg studio is Laurence Caromba, International Studies lecturer at the School of Social Science, Monash. Well, before we start going to that conversation, Godfrey, you'd like to give us an update on Twitter. Let's see how elections are shaping. No, it's important that we keep an eye
absolutely on what's happening on social media, as well as, of course, I've got a question for you actually that I want you to prepare as we go for that Twitter update. The public relations of how this has been handled, that is the conduct of the war in the Northeast. could it have been done better on that front? Okay, so let's give you a quick update. So we had a little bit of confusion about whether President Goodluck Jonathan had been accredited or not. Well, it appears he wasn't accredited the first time. The machine failed 4 times, and then he went back. Now he has come back and has finally, apparently in under 1 minute, he was accredited. So he has been accredited. And he's urging Nigerians, by the way, to be very patient in terms of the conduct of this process. In the meantime, the APC has been generally, I think, happy with the conduct of the accreditation process, which I think is very important. And will continue, I think, to report progress in terms of that accreditation process. To remind our viewers who are not familiar with the process here in Nigeria, the actual voting has not started. That will start at 1 p.m. What we are actually seeing now is accreditation of voters with their permanent voters cards. So you go in, you get verified, and then once the system identifies you and says you are who you say you are then finally able to vote. So we continue that process. So let's go back to our discussion around the military issues and how the military has conducted this whole operation. I want to handle it from 2 fronts. One from the government side in terms of how it has, obviously being President Goodluck Jonathan being the commander-in-chief, and how it has projected the image of the army in the fight against the Boko Haram. And then on the other side, the military itself in terms of its own communications and how it's been taking on Boko Haram. Could they have done better?
Oh yes, there has been so many mistakes in terms of how the military and the government, by the way, has communicated the message coming from the Northeast. For instance, we had so many instances where the public were informed that the Chibok girls, for instance, were going to be brought back home after a certain negotiation, and we realized in the final analysis that in fact there was no negotiation going on, or perhaps negotiation may have gone on with a splinter group and that didn't have influence at all. And what we found eventually was that there was no action that led to the release of the girls. That was a public relations disaster for the government and for the military. We also had instances where the military made announcements, specific categorical announcement concerning the purported capture and death of Shakau, the head of the insurgents. Up till now, there is no independent verification as to whether Shakau was actually arrested or whether he's still alive or not. So what we've seen across the board in terms of how messages have been communicated both by the military and by the government has been disastrous, if you ask me. But the tide appears to have changed very dramatically over the past 6 weeks. The president, for instance, 2 days ago on Wednesday, made specific commitment that Goza was going to be liberated on Friday. And by noon on Friday, we already had confirmed reports that Goza had in fact fallen to the military. So I think that these 6 weeks, have proved to be very decisive in terms of how the campaign has been conducted against the insurgents.
Okay, Laurence, let's bring you in here now. We've talked about the gains made so far by the Nigerian military, and of course, a key question that emerges now is if the Nigerian military can sustain these gains going forward. Now, we know that that is going to perhaps require a lot of funding from the federal government. I mean, terrorist experts that we've spoken to continue to tell us that terrorism in Africa, unfortunately, may be here to stay. And this is a fight, a battle that the entire continent will have to fight going forward. Do you see a demonstration on the part of the Nigerian government and perhaps on the African Union to provide much needed funding, much needed troops to ensure that terrorism doesn't get out of hand on the continent?
Yes, absolutely. As you say, warfare is expensive, and as I've already said, one of the reasons that Nigeria has been able to make these gains is just because it's been spending more money on its military, getting better equipped, and so on. And it definitely raises problems, especially when you look at this in terms of the broader fiscal crisis that the Nigerian government is going to be facing. As a result of the crash in the international oil price. I mean, this is something that's going to affect every capacity of the Nigerian state, since oil revenues constitute such a large percentage of the government's budget. So the question of whether the government is going to be able to sustain this effort in the long run, it's going to be difficult.
Right, Austin, I think we have lost Chris on the line, but let's continue with you.
Yes.
Now, he talked about funding. That's a crucial issue, but then we're this is against the backdrop of falling oil prices, falling lower revenues for the federal government.
Yeah.
I mean, just last year, where there was a long debate on whether or not the lawmakers would approve a $1 billion loan to the federal government, for the military. Now, with low revenues, are you confident that we will have the required funding? And of course, there were also issues of corruption around whether or not the money will be used judiciously. We heard of stories of soldiers complaining of not having even bullets for their guns. But that's a different story now, because we have they've been taking large purchases. But your take going forward, would we be able to sustain this?
Yes, I think that since there seems to be a final recognition by the AU, the African Union, that there needs to be a concerted international response to the crisis. Since the UN has also given its fullest possible support to this alliance against Boko Haram, by logical extension, one would expect that these international bodies, the AU and the UN, should be able to galvanize the extensive financial resources that they need to be able to support the campaign. I think that we need to also see greater monetary transparency within Nigeria itself concerning allocations meant for the military. It's not enough simply to talk about whether you need more money or not. We need to also be certain that when the money is eventually allocated to the campaign, they are transparently used. So what I think we need to do, we need to see, on two fronts. One, we need to make sure that the international community comes into support. Whatever they are doing in Syria, Iraq, and the rest of them, we've seen that not just the U.S., but we've seen in a kaleidoscope of all kinds of countries, contributing military and financial assets. So we need to make sure that we have that kind of international response concerning both military effort and funding to make sure that this is sustained over the long term.
Indeed. We're going to have to take a break at this point. Thank you so much, Dr. Austin Tam-George, for being with us. He's Executive Director, Institute of Communications and Corporate Studies, Lagos. We've also been talking to you via telephone, Chris Moghalu, ex-military intelligence specialist, and from our studio in Johannesburg was Laurence Caromba, International Studies Lecturer at the School of Social Science, Monash. We've been looking at security issues before the election and, of course, during these elections. Stay with us for more coverage of Nigeria's 2015 general elections.